glorious Evenlode Valley, a protected landscape in the heart of the Cotswolds. A special place for nature and for people, but let's look beneath the surface. In fact, none of the rivers and brooks here are of good ecological status. Although at first glance the river can seem like a tranquil and beautiful place, it is now brown and murky where it was once crystal clear and teeming with life. In this film, we'll explore how the Evenlode Catchment Partnership is working together to tackle the complex issues involved. So what is the cause for the decline in the River Evenlode?
So in the catchment we have issues of surface water pesticides, issues of phosphates and sediments, all of which is contributing to a loss of biodiversity, a loss of habitat, and a loss of our Cotswold flora and fauna.
It's a pale shadow of its former self. We've got vast quantities of really damaging phosphorus and nitrate pouring into the river, and that's driving a system which has become completely impoverished.
And that's having a really bad effect on the life that these waterways are supposed to sustain. Species of fish, invertebrates are struggling, and all too often the bed of the river is just covered in a dense mat of gungy algae, diatoms, brown slime. Now there's very little water crowfoot and it's completely covered with sludge and sediment.
And we believe that loss of the larger water plants has been due entirely to the proliferation of algae, suspended algae in the river throughout the summer months, where light has literally been blocked out from the riverbed.
You cannot see the bottom of the river at all at any point that I know of.
Pump failures from sewage holding tanks, which leads to overflow into the stream. People are beginning to think very hard and should do about swimming in it.
Sewage in the river is a real issue and it is not safe to swim in.
And what this means to local residents is that they cannot be confident in allowing their children or their pets to go into the river because it's contaminated.
Most of us who have been investigating the situation consider that the treated wastewater from our sewage works is the main culprit for providing too many nutrients in the river.
So there are some real significant problems which Thames Water have to address before the Evenlode is anything like good ecological status.
The Evenlode Catchment Partnership has a vision to restore the Evenlode to good ecological status. To do that, everyone needs to work together: landowners, communities, organisations and individuals. One of the ways individuals can help is by volunteering as citizen scientists
to establish the health of the river and to start to build a record of differences between different parts of the water catchment as to the chemistry of the water bodies and differences in the invertebrate life.
Recently I've got involved in testing the water in the River Evenlode just below the sewage treatment works, and it's surprising the amount of nitrates and phosphates that I've found, and we're collecting lots of information to send back to Thames Water to try and persuade them that we'd like them to do more regarding polluting the river with sewage in particular.
Another way of monitoring the health of the river is to look at the number and type of invertebrates. There can be a massive difference between the health of the tributaries and the Evenlode River itself.
I'm standing in the Little Stock Brook, which at this point in Milton under Wychwood is a very healthy brook. What I'm doing here is 3-minute kick sampling. We're just going to put our sample in the monitoring tray so we can have a really good look at what's in here. We're using the identification chart provided by the Riverfly Partnership, and we can see what we're looking for. Freshwater shrimps, big mayfly nymphs. Not only normal olive nymphs, but we also have 1 or 2 blue-winged olive nymphs. So this has been a very good example of what you can get in a healthy tributary of the Evenlode.
This shows what should be seen throughout the catchment, but sadly this is not replicated further downstream, where the twin problems of agricultural runoff and sewage affects the ability of the invertebrates to survive. This impacts the entire ecosystem of the river, so we need to work with water companies and landowners in order to turn things around.
Obviously, landowners having 70% of the land in the UK under their ownership, it's huge importance that we recognise landowners' role in the countryside and in water quality. We're really lucky that in the Evenlode we've had a lot of engagement with our farmers. They're absolute pleasure to work with, and they are really the stewards of our countryside.
So what are landowners doing to tackle these issues of poor water quality, lack of biodiversity and flooding?
So this is Pudlicott Farm, and this is a biodiversity net gain project. So this is a big wetland that we've been excavating in the floodplain, and there's also elements of neutral and floodplain grassland, and also scrub and some tree planting as well.
What they're actually doing behind us is they're removing some of the topsoil and subsoil to install a series of sort of wetland areas, more ponded areas, and scrapes as well.
It's good to see some of the landowners locally being foresighted enough to get involved in this.
Areas like Pudlicott are really, really important along the catchment, that we can store some water. And most importantly, you know, for Pudlicott and other farmers' ambitions, is that actually there's still an element of food productivity here.
Historically, this behind us again would have been, you know, wet grassland, which would have been lovely. And over the last couple of hundred years, it's been drained. The railway was built. The land has changed its use and become intensive agriculture.
So historically, the owners of Pudlicott might have had arable on this field. It's flooded, they've lost their crops, they've therefore lost income. Whereas with a more diverse grass sward, they might actually have a more productive cattle grazing system or sheep grazing system here.
And the present owner has decided to revert that to a mixture of low intensity grazing with a few Hereford cattle and some wetlands. So the money stacks up, the ecology stacks up. I suppose what's not to like, and then there will be some remaining pieces of arable on the farm which will continue to produce food.
So we're able to balance food productivity whilst we're looking for better environmental choices too.
So the idea here is to form a series of interconnected pools, all driven by a spring-fed system that comes under the railway line. It's an old system, an old spring, which we've broken into and flooded some scrapes and pools that are still building and developing now, and pieces of wet grassland associated with it. So they will, and have already started to, bring in waders. We've had some lapwing and common sandpiper here, and the wet grassland around the pools will be ideal for a whole range of invertebrates, hopefully some amphibians and a few key species, with the scrub around.
So whilst the prime driver of the project at Pudlicott is biodiversity, other projects have been aimed at reducing flooding.
We're looking to identify opportunities where we can store more water and look across the catchment, you know, where we can slow the flow, thinking of downstream who might be receiving that water in some of the flooding events, which sadly, due to climate change, might only increase or exacerbate. So with the scheme, what we've been trialling is installing a series of wetlands, scrapes across the landscape. And most importantly, that's been really exciting because farmers have led that engagement. They've really wanted to work with us and work with the ECP on this.
Going back to 2007, I think the village, Milton under Wychwood, had a level of flooding, and obviously we manage the land responsible for where the water flows come from. So in terms of doing flood management work, there wasn't many options other than putting in the measures that we've done here. Before we did the scheme, I was struggling with land drainage. So obviously the crops won't grow if they're sitting in wet soil. So having these new bunds to hold the water back is benefiting me, in as much as my drains can now run into these rather than backing up into the field. So I'm getting less flooding in the field, I'm getting better crops, and obviously massive benefit downstream that I'm holding water back to let that drain away before more water joins it.
Biodiversity is a huge part of what's important for farmers and landowners in the Evenlode. They've inherited their farms through generations. They want to protect their natural assets and they want to see a thriving amount of biodiversity across their farms.
The primary objective was obviously to reduce flooding, but I think above that, obviously there's water quality, biodiversity benefits, woodland creation. There's the 3 online ponds that we've put in the next field. As you go down the ponds, the water quality improves in terms of sedimentation, phosphate levels. So there is a benefit. There's a lot of work going on from ourselves to get the woodland to establish properly and to maintain the habitat around them. And it'd be just nice to get the data to know that it's having a benefit, so that you can show that there is other benefits besides just the flood risk reduction. It doesn't interfere with the day-to-day farming very much. It actually improves it in most respects, and it's, I guess, what you term public money for public goods, which isn't going to be delivered anywhere else except for on farmland.
We have to produce food sustainably, and we have to find a space on those farms to link up ecological diversity.
And really the biggest change that I've seen is the change in farmers' minds, that they're putting environmental services and their contribution to the environment at the forefront of their minds and at the forefront of their business decisions.
It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be glamorous, it doesn't have to be at this scale, but there are always corners, small pieces of land.
I think the emphasis of the farm is very much conservation based now. Moving forward, yes, all the sort of natural capital that we have will probably play a more significant part in our income.
Another example of the work the Evenlode Catchment Partnership has been doing is on the Blenheim estate.
We're on the River Dawn, which is a tributary of the River Glyme, which is a tributary of the River Evenlode, and we're just upstream of Blenheim Palace. Historically, the river has been dredged, it's been separated from its floodplain, meaning that only in extreme high flows does the water flow out onto the floodplain. Now that affects lots of things, can leave extremely high energies in the river system. And when you have high energies during heavy rainfall, a lot of the species, a lot of the invertebrates, a lot of the fish and a lot of the plants find it very difficult to survive. They get washed downstream. The floodplain reconnection reduces those energies under those high flows, allows the reconnection with the floodplain for species such as fish. Juvenile fish can sit on the floodplain when there's water in the floodplain instead of being entrained in an extremely fast-moving river, and then it all joins back downstream. We're moving away from very river-focused restoration because we realise the importance of looking at the whole catchment. We want to change the way that the upper catchment is managed, the way that the agriculture is carried out, because we're in a clay catchment, the rainfall runs quite rapidly down the field sides. You get a lot of sediment that runs off fields. Because the river has been dredged, it carries all that fine sediment very rapidly downstream. Our main objectives on this site was reconnection of the floodplain using natural products in a cheap and innovative way. We created 5 or 6 beaver dams using the willow from the trees that were already here. The aim of those dams being that they affect the water level behind them, which then increases the frequency with which water can flow onto the floodplain. The water flows across the floodplain, through the grassland, through the woodland, and back down into the river downstream. Because the energies are much slower in the floodplain, the sediment drops out and becomes incorporated within the floodplain, and there is also carbon storage benefits from floodplain reconnection. Over time, by using natural processes, the power of the water, the sediment deposition, multiple channels will be created, and this section here will become much wetter and develop wetland habitats.
So with this site, Blenheim Estate are already noticing benefits. While the water comes out of the river, it slows down the flow, which helps in flooding situations, but it also will help in drought as well. So obviously the climate is changing, and it's these sort of projects which kind of adapt with the climate. They noticed that this field was wetter because the water had been going across it, which meant it was kind of the last area of lush grass when we were in the drought. So they were able to get their sheep on and feed them when everywhere else was dry.
The trick's going to be linking these little jewels up, these little pearls, with the string of the necklace, you know, the hedgerows and the little river systems, and making those function so that these jewels are all linked together and we build that strength, resilience and diversity.
But it's not just down to landowners to make this happen. We need the water companies to do their part as well, such as stripping the phosphate and nitrate out of the effluent, and by upgrading the sewage treatment works, capacity and infrastructure so they do not spill raw sewage.
Certainly Thames Water have a role to play in the quality, the water quality of the River Evenlode. That comes in part from discharges of untreated sewage, which we find totally unacceptable. It also comes from other sources as well, like nutrient loading that would kind of come through our sewage treatment works. However, as I'm sure people will be aware, that finances can be particularly constrained, and at the moment there are challenges that we're experiencing with inflation and other costs that have meant that we've had to reprioritise what we can achieve with the same amount of money.
And one of the problems with this project is that not only is the Evenlode polluted, but as it spills during the winter, we've got sewage treatment works dumping huge amounts of untreated sewage laden with phosphorus, which will land on these newly restored fields, and they will compromise the ability of the grass sward to meet its ecological objectives. High phosphorus levels are not good for an ecologically diverse sward, and that's what we're trying to create. So Thames Water are not only polluting the river, but they are in fact risking the success of bits of this project.
Water companies have to adequately treat our waste and enforce the highest standards to make sure that we preserve these beautiful waterways, not just for now, but for generations into the future.
The river and its catchment isn't just important for farming and for nature, it's important for the communities that live alongside it.
So our project is reaching out to both school children and general public through events and through education sessions by the river. We're educating them about water quality, and we're educating them about what they can do to preserve this very beautiful environment that needs protecting. We're doing a lot of work with kick nets and pond dipping so that children can actually see the invertebrates that live in their streams, and they're always fascinated by that. It's one of the highlights of our field work. And we're also very proud of our Duke of Edinburgh students who've been helping with habitat management, creating new wetland habitats at a small scale using analogue beaver dams. We have now engaged with thousands of children in the last year and a half. We've also engaged with the general public through a lot of events, festivals and fairs. The interest in the river is increasing all the time. The project is really about getting children out, getting families out, and really engaging with their river, learning about it so they will love it, and when they love it, they will protect it.
All these issues, water quality, biodiversity, natural flood management, public access and engagement, are all interlinked. Changes to one impacts the others. The Evenlode Catchment Partnership is helping tackle the issues in the Evenlode by bringing all the organisations, groups and individuals together. But what is it that makes it so successful?
We have trained hydrologists, we have education specialists, we have people who are experienced in landscape restoration.
It's needed that breadth of knowledge to deliver.
Because it brings in all sorts of different groups. So Us as the Environment Agency, we're working with Wild Oxfordshire, who lead the Catchment Partnership. There are local residents. There are lots of different groups involved. By involving all of the stakeholders, you're going to get such better results than if you're just trying to do it with a kind of single entity.
Most importantly, it's that we're all working together for the common goal of moving away from poor ecological status.
None of us can do this alone. It has to be a partnership, and we all have to work together. Otherwise, we're not going to reach the solution that we require.
Despite all this work, we need you to join us in this mission, whether it's helping fund our work, messing about in waders, or campaigning to make change happen.
I'd love people to look below the surface of the waters when they take a walk. Think about how your river looks. Does it look healthy?
We're very keen to get people writing to their local MPs to make sure that water quality is very high up the political agenda.
You can write to your water company. You can take samples and join the growing band of citizen scientists.
And test your water, find out what's in it, find out what lives there. And if you see a problem, don't stop until you get a solution.
It's not enough for Thames Water to help fund our work. They must take action themselves to stop polluting the river.
I think people should consider very carefully about what they do with their vote. Sewage and agriculture are big issues, and you need to think very hard about who's going to give us a best return for the money that we pay and who's going to do the best things for the environment. And just keep that pressure on, because without people pressure, then the water companies and agriculture will continue to get away with pollution. Be angry. In a nice way, be angry.
And this action is necessary for all the benefits a healthy river can provide.
I'd love to be able to know that we can swim freely and enjoy the Evenlode, and that the public, can access and engage with it. I think that's important on so many levels for our mental well-being, to connect with nature.
For my grandchildren to enjoy the water and to be able to go into the water confident and see fish and catch the water bugs and see frogs and newts.
Rivers that are flowing clear, where you can look through gin clear water and see the bottom.
And I'd love to see a return and increase of biodiversity and species across the Evenlode.
A really healthy river bed and plant base that are good for the invertebrates, which are the base of this really vital food chain and ecosystem.
Also for all of the land around it to be working in a great system, so farming to kind of to evolve, to be positive for nature, to increase biodiversity, because when we're looking at this, we're not looking at it just the river in isolation, we're thinking about it as a whole catchment, and that's kind of what's important.
And if we continue working together and take action before it's too late, then the river can be teeming with life once again.